If you want to make authentic Chicago-style thin crust pizza with a sourdough crust, you've made it to the right video. This Midwestern style of thin crust pizza has seen a resurgence in popularity in recent years, but it was being made in pubs and taverns in Chicago and probably a bunch of other places since the 1940s. This sourdough version of Chicago-style thin crust pizza takes 3 days to make. Day 1, you feed your starter. Day 2, you prepare ahead of time the thin crust pizza doughs and the thick and zesty tomato sauce. Then on day 3, you're baking your pizzas and generally just having a great time because it's pizza night. Let's make some sourdough Chicago-style thin crust pizza. On the evening of day 1, take 25 grams of leftover sourdough starter out of the fridge. Then feed that starter 50 grams of water and an equal amount 50 grams of all-purpose flour. Stir the fed starter together until you get a pancake batter-like consistency, and then let your starter sit out overnight for about 6 to 8 hours or until it doubles in size like this. Then it's ready to use to mix up a batch of sourdough pizza dough. Chicago thin crust pizza is sometimes referred to as cracker crust because it shares some similarities to a cracker. Instead of being soft and chewy, this dough should end up being flaky, brittle, and crispy, just like a cracker. Start by adding 450 grams of all-purpose flour to your mixing bowl, and then one thing that's going to make this dough cracker-like is adding oil. Some restaurants use oil, some use butter, but I'm using 25 grams of extra virgin olive oil in this recipe. Mixing oil into the flour now will inhibit some of the gluten from forming, leading to your final result, which is a pizza crust that's crispy and crunchy rather than chewy. So stir the oil into the flour with a spoon to coat some of the flour with the oil. After that, add 10 grams of white sugar, another ingredient that's sometimes common in crackers but not pizza doughs, and then 10 grams of salt. I'm using kosher salt. You can use sea salt, table salt, whatever you have. Mix the dry ingredients together to combine the salt and sugar into the flour, and then it's time for the wet ingredients. And when I say wet ingredients, I'm only referring to 2 things for this dough: your active sourdough starter and water. So get out your active and risen sourdough starter and add 100 grams of it to your mixing bowl. Once you've got 100 grams of starter in the bowl, you should have a little bit of starter left over, about 25 grams. You can put that back into the fridge for the next time you want to bake something sourdough. For the next and final ingredient, add 225 grams of water. To make a cracker thin crust, we're using a very low hydration dough. Technically, this dough will just be 55% hydration. But because we have additional oil included in the dough, it will feel more like a 60% hydration dough, something in line more with a typical pizza dough. But by using oil in the dough and less water, we will achieve a crispier, more cracker-like crust. Basically, what I'm trying to get across is that this dough is unique. You can't just take a Neapolitan-style pizza dough and roll it really thin and expect to get a Chicago-style thin crust. This dough utilizes a different technique and some different ingredients to get a cracker-thin crust that many people love. Now that all the ingredients are in the bowl, mix everything together with a spoon until a rough dough is formed. Then knead the dough on your kitchen counter for 5 minutes or so until the dough starts to hold together as a ball. Then cover up the dough with the mixing bowl and let it rest for 5 minutes. After the 5-minute rest, the dough should be smoother and much easier to knead. 5 minutes later, uncover the dough and knead it for an additional 3 minutes. The dough should now feel smooth and a little bit tacky. That's all the kneading you need to do. Go ahead and cover the dough with the mixing bowl one more time, let it rest for 5 minutes, and then you'll be ready to divide and shape the dough. For the dividing and shaping step, we're going to be balling up the dough into 3 equal-sized dough balls. So using a bench scraper or a chef's knife, divide the dough into 3 equal pieces. Each piece should weigh roughly 273 grams. If you're using a digital scale, this is easy to do, or you can just equally divide them by eye, no big deal. Once you've got 3 equal-sized pieces of dough, stretch and fold the pieces of dough underneath your thumb to form balls, and then roll the dough against the counter to smooth out the dough ball and to hide the seam underneath. Once all 3 dough balls are shaped, transfer them into a container dusted with a small amount of flour. I used a 9x13 inch metal cake pan with a lid. When your dough balls are arranged in the container, close the lid or cover them up with a sheet of plastic wrap to keep the dough from drying out. Now the doughs are ready for their first rise. Allow the dough balls to rise in the container at room temperature for 4 to 6 hours, or until they roughly double in size. And don't worry about the dough balls overproofing or rising too much. Overproof dough is actually okay for this style of pizza since it can actually enhance the cracker-like nature of the pizza crust. So once the dough balls have roughly doubled in size like this, it's time to roll them out nice and thin. Here's what you'll need for the rolling process. A large metal pizza pan, or at least if it's a rectangular one, it has to be big enough to hold a 12-inch round pizza crust. Then you'll need 4 squares of parchment paper, 1 to go below each pizza crust and then 1 to go on top. Some semolina flour for dusting. You could also use all-purpose flour or bread flour, but I like the texture of the semolina flour. I'm going to be using it later as well to help the pizzas not stick to the pizza peel. Then the last thing you'll need is a rolling pin. Restaurants in Chicago usually use a dough sheeter, which is a large machine. If you're like me and you don't have one of those, use a rolling pin. Now for this style of dough, it's best to roll out the doughs individually ahead of time, and then you can top them and bake them later, even a day later or more. I'll explain more of that in a bit, but right now we're gonna roll out these doughs. So grab one of the doughs and place it onto your kitchen counter, dusted with a little bit of that semolina flour, and dip both sides of the dough in the flour. Flatten the dough ball into a circle with your hands, and then using the rolling pin, roll the dough ball into a very thin 12-inch to 13-inch circle. You'll want each pizza crust to end up being around 12 inches in diameter, and since the doughs might shrink a little bit while they're resting, if you shoot for a 13-inch diameter pizza crust now, it'll end up being around 12 inches when you bake it, so you can overshoot a little bit. Roll your pizza crust really thin, around 1/8 inch thick, and then if it's not a perfect circle, you can cut off the edges with a pizza cutter to make it more circular. This is what they're doing in the restaurants in Chicago. So it's technically not cheating. I'm just showing you the one, but go ahead and roll out all 3 of your pizza crusts and then dock them with a fork. That just means poking them all over with a fork. You want all those tiny little holes throughout the dough. That's going to prevent the crust from bubbling up and puffing up in the oven when you bake the pizza. For this cracker thin style of crust, you don't really want any bubbling. Now transfer the first pizza dough on top of a sheet of parchment paper that should be on top of your metal sheet pan or your pizza pan. Then stretch it out and arrange it so it's completely flat and around 12 to 13 inches in diameter. Then stack all 3 pizza crusts one on top of the other until you've got a stack of 3 pizza crusts separated by a sheet of parchment paper in between each one. Then cover up the last pizza crust with one more sheet of parchment paper and place something relatively light on top of it that'll keep the parchment from blowing away. Now it's time to move these doughs to the fridge to cure. Curing in this case just means let your dough chill in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours, or until whenever you're ready to bake the pizzas the next day. During this time, the pizza doughs will slightly dry out and develop a more complex flavor. And since they'll dry out slightly in the fridge, the doughs will also be very easy to slide off the pizza peel the next day, and they'll have a crunchier, more cracker-like texture. So just let your doughs chill in the fridge overnight. On the same day you make your dough, make your thick and zesty Chicago-style thin crust pizza sauce. Some places cook their sauce, some places don't. This one is lightly cooked to bring all the flavors together. Here are all the ingredients you'll need. 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, then 1 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. I picked this brand of crushed tomatoes because it's just one ingredient, tomatoes. Pick whatever brand of crushed tomatoes that you like the taste of. Then you'll need a 6-ounce can of tomato paste, but you'll only be using 3 ounces for this sauce. This is a heavily seasoned sauce. It uses a lot of Italian herbs and spices, so you need 1 teaspoon each of dried basil, oregano, thyme, and marjoram. Then you need a half teaspoon of red pepper flakes. And then to finish the sauce and balance out the flavors, you'll need 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of white sugar to balance the sweetness, and then 1 teaspoon of garlic powder or granulated garlic. That's best to add in at the end with the salt and sugar so the garlic doesn't burn. To start the cooking process, put your pan on medium heat and let it heat up for about a minute. Then add in the 1 tablespoon of olive oil once the pan is hot, and stir it around and just cook the olive oil, let it heat up for about another minute until it's glistening. Once the oil is heated up, add all of those Italian herbs and spices. You'll save the sugar, salt, and garlic powder for later. Stir all of the herbs and spices into the oil and let them toast in that oil on medium heat for about a minute. The toasting process will sort of wake up all of the flavors of the dried herbs and spices. Once the herbs and spices are toasted, add in the 3 ounces of tomato paste directly on top of the herbs. Turn the heat down to low at this point, and then stir the tomato paste into the herbs and cook it, toasting it for about a minute. Once the tomato paste has become darker and toastier like this, and the herbs have joined together with the paste, you can add the other ingredients. With the pan still on low heat, empty the entire 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes into the pan. If you want to get every last bit of those crushed tomatoes out of the can, add just a splash of water to the can, swirl it around, and add that to the pan as well. Stir the crushed tomatoes into the other ingredients to combine, and then add the remaining 3 ingredients, the salt, white sugar, and granulated garlic. Stir those ingredients in to dissolve them, and then stir a little bit more until everything's fully combined into one cohesive sauce. Once the sauce is combined, turn the heat up to medium and bring the sauce up to a simmer where it's just barely bubbling. Turn the heat to low or medium-low to maintain that simmer, then add a lid on top of the pan with some holes to vent the steam, and let the sauce simmer for 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, remove the lid, turn the heat off, and your sauce is done. During the 5 minutes of cooking time, the sauce will have thickened up just a little bit and the flavors will have come together, giving you a thick and zesty, lightly sweet sauce that is perfect for this type of pizza. You can make this sauce fresh on the same day that you're making your pizzas, but if you want to make the sauce ahead of time, transfer the sauce to a glass container, let it cool down, and then pop a lid on, and store the sauce in the fridge for a couple of hours up to a few days. You can make the sauce a few days ahead of time and use it to make your pizza later. Alright, it's the next day, the doughs have been cured, the pizza sauce has been made, it's finally time to prepare the toppings and bake the pizzas. You'll see that in the 12 plus hours that these doughs were in the fridge, this one on top has got a nice dry exterior, but it's still doughy and fresh on the underside. That's exactly what you're looking for. The other 2 doughs, however, even though they've had the exact same amount of fermentation time in the fridge, they're still doughy on top because they weren't exposed to as much air in the fridge. And you want each dough to be at least dried out on one side. So what I'm going to do is just separate each of these doughs on top of their parchment paper, place them on the kitchen counter exposed to the air, and I'm going to let the tops of the pizza crusts dry out for about 30 minutes while I preheat the oven. Preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit and keep a baking steel or a pizza stone on the bottom rack of your oven. If you don't have a baking steel or stone, you can bake the pizza directly on a pan. It doesn't give as great of results, but I'll show you how to do that in this video as well. 30 minutes later, it's time to bake the first pizza. I'm doing a Chicago smog, or sausage, mushrooms, onion, and pepper. I'll show you what ingredients you need for these pizzas as I assemble them. Start by taking your pizza crust. You'll notice that it has a dry side on one side and a doughy side underneath. Get out your pizza peel that's at least 12 inches in diameter and sprinkle it with a little bit of semolina flour. This is where some people might want to use cornmeal. If you do that, make sure it's a really finely ground cornmeal so it doesn't stay too crunchy after you bake the pizza. At this point, flip the pizza over onto the pizza peel so the dry side is down and the sticky side is facing up. With that dry side against the peel and the little bit of semolina flour, this dough slides really easily. If you've ever had pizza dough stick to your pizza peel, this will be a dream come true. To assemble this pizza, start with a half cup of that prepared pizza sauce. Then using a spoon, distribute the sauce in an even, thin layer all the way to the edges of the pizza crust. Some people like to leave more crust on the end than others, but that part is up to you. Now for the cheese. For a 12-inch pizza, you'll need 8 ounces of low-moisture mozzarella cheese. And it's best to shred the block of cheese yourself so there's no additives. For these pizzas, I used half low-moisture whole milk mozzarella and half low-moisture part skim mozzarella. If I had to use just one, I would use all whole milk mozzarella, but some places use part skim allegedly, and it browns a little bit better. So if you use a mix of the two, your pizza will turn out great. You'll need to put down 8 ounces of cheese total for this pizza, but I'm putting half of the cheese down now, and then I'll put half of it later on top of the rest of the toppings. Some places in Chicago put all of the cheese on top of the toppings, but I like to do 50-50, so it's the best of both worlds. Now for the sausage. For one 12-inch pizza, you'll need a half pound or 8 ounces of Italian sausage, preferably one that contains fennel. Make the sausage yourself or get it from the store. Either way works. Now arrange the raw sausage on top of the cheese in quarter-sized chunks. You can do smaller sized chunks as well, as you'll see me do in a later pizza. If you're worried about using raw sausage, don't be. The sausage will fully cook in the oven, and the grease will combine with the cheese as it bakes to create a delicious Windy City delicacy. Now altogether, you'll need 1 cup of diced vegetables. That's a 1/3 cup of white mushrooms, a 1/3 cup of red onions, and a 1/3 cup of green bell pepper. Place the remaining half of the mozzarella cheese on top of all of those toppings, and then finish the pizza with a sprinkle of Italian seasonings or dried oregano, a pinch of kosher salt or sea salt, and 1 to 2 tablespoons of grated Pecorino Romano or Parmesan cheese. Now finally, your pizza is ready to bake. Open your oven and carefully slide the pizza onto the preheated baking steel or pizza stone. It will slide very easily off of the pizza peel, but you do want to be careful that you don't spill any of the cheese onto the baking steel or the bottom of your oven. So go slowly and confidently and then bake your pizza for 10 minutes at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping an eye on it near the end so the pizza doesn't burn. 10 minutes later, take the pizza out of the oven and carefully transfer it onto a wire rack or cooling rack, and finish it, if desired, with a little bit of extra Pecorino Romano or Parmesan cheese. Letting the pizza cool on the cooling rack for at least 5 minutes will help keep the pizza crispier, and it will help you avoid destroying the roof of your mouth. After the 5-minute rest, transfer your pizza onto a cutting board and cut it into squares. This is a party style or tavern style cut. This is the typical cut for Chicago-style thin crust that lets you feed more people with a small pizza. As it should be, this pizza is cracker thin. It holds up those cheese and toppings very well. The bottom is perfectly brown and definitely not burnt, and this pizza smells amazing. If you grew up in or around Chicago or in the Midwest like I did, just the smell of this pizza might trigger some memories for you. This just smells like the supreme pizzas I grew up eating. Something about those peppers, onions, mushrooms cooking along with that sausage, it just comes together to create a unique pizzeria type of smell that's just so different from New York style or Neapolitan style pizzas. Which I love, by the way, but Chicago thin crust deserves some respect. And if you want to make this style of pizza, definitely try out this topping combination. But you might consider making smaller chunks of sausage, unlike what I did here, so that you get a few chunks of sausage per slice of pizza. Here's a pizza topped with Italian sausage and Chicago-style Giardiniera, or pickled vegetables. This is also a slightly different variation, with most of the cheese going on top of the toppings instead of underneath. To make it, put some semolina flour on your pizza peel, and then flip the pizza dough over and peel off the parchment paper. Dry side down and sticky side up. Place a half cup of the pizza sauce right on top and spread it all the way to the edges. You're going to use 8 ounces of shredded mozzarella cheese, put a little down right on top of the sauce, maybe a quarter to a third of the total amount, and then put down a half pound or 8 ounces of Italian sausage right on top of the cheese. I'm breaking the sausage up into smaller pieces this time than for the one before. After the sausage, you'll need a third cup of Chicago-style Giardiniera or pickled vegetables. These are usually spicy, chunky pickled vegetables that are packed in oil. If you can't find any near you, check online, I'll include a link below, or go to your nearest Potbelly's sandwich shop and get their jar of hot peppers. It's basically the same thing, just under a different name. Spread out a third cup of the Giardiniera on top of the sausage, and then put the rest of the mozzarella, 8 ounces in total, on top of the toppings. Finish this pizza with a pinch of Italian herbs or dried oregano, a pinch of salt, and then a grating of Pecorino Romano cheese or Parmesan. Pop this pizza onto your baking steel and bake it at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. Let the pizza cool for 5 minutes on a cooling rack, and while it's cooling, add another grating of Pecorino Romano or Parmesan cheese to finish it off. Once it's cooled, slice the pizza however you want, as long as it's into squares, and enjoy. The combination of sausage and Chicago-style Giardiniera is another Chicago classic. Savory sausage, crunchy crust, and slightly tangy and spicy Giardiniera, this pizza is absolutely delicious. It's one of my favorites. But plain cheese is also good, and if you don't have a baking steel or pizza stone, you can still make this pizza happen. Here's how to do it. Take out a non-stick or stainless steel pizza pan and sprinkle it fairly generously with semolina flour or really finely ground cornmeal. Flip your pizza dough over directly on top of the cornmeal or semolina flour so the dry side is facing down and the sticky side is facing up. This winning combination means your pizza dough will very likely not stick to the pan, so just another thing you don't have to worry about. Top your dough with a half cup of the pizza sauce and spread it around to the edges. Take 8 ounces of shredded mozzarella and place it directly on top of the sauce. You don't have to worry about any toppings for this one. Spread the mozzarella to the edges and then add a pinch of Italian seasonings or dried oregano, a pinch of kosher salt or sea salt, and then a grating of Pecorino Romano cheese or Parmesan. Transfer your pizza to the oven, place it onto the middle rack, and bake it for 10 to 12 minutes at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. It might take a little bit longer to bake since it's not on a baking steel or pizza stone. But after 10 minutes, my pizza was looking good. You could leave your pizza directly on the pan, but I would move it to a wire rack or cooling rack to enhance the crispiness. Let your pizza cool for 5 minutes, then transfer it onto your cutting board, slice it into squares, and enjoy. This pizza won't be as crispy as if you were to use a baking steel or a pizza stone, so if you can get one of those, definitely do it. Your pizza will come out better. But this pizza is still worth making, even with just a pizza pan. That was sourdough Chicago-style thin crust pizza. The recipe will be linked in the video description below. If you make it, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.